Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at behavioral therapy. And I have to say, the sources you sent in, they have me really intrigued. We've got some, like classic theories, but also some really cutting edge stuff, even a few things I had never even heard of before. You ready to kind of explore how we learn and unlearn behaviors?
Absolutely, yeah. What I find fascinating is how behavioral therapy has really evolved. We'll touch on the giants like, Pavlov and Skinner, of course. But you also included research on the influence of genetics, which kind of adds a whole new layer to the conversation. It really shows how this field is always growing.
Okay, so let's start with the basics for someone who might be totally new to this.
Yeah.
How would you sum up the core idea behind behavioral therapy?
Sure. So at its heart, behavioral therapy focuses on this idea that our behaviors actually drive our feelings and thoughts, not the other way around. It's really about recognizing patterns in our actions and learning to change them to reach certain goals.
So instead of trying to change how we feel directly, we can focus on changing what we do and let that impact kind of our inner world.
Exactly. And a key principle is that if a behavior can be learned, it can also be unlearned. That's where the hope for positive change comes in.
Now, you mentioned that we'd be talking about some of the big names in the field. I'm guessing Pavlov and his dog fall into that category?
They do. Pavlov's research on classical conditioning, it really laid the groundwork for understanding how we learn through association. His experiment showed that pairing a neutral stimulus like a bell with food could eventually trigger the dog to salivate at the sound of the bell alone.
Right, the dog learns to connect the bell with the anticipation of food, but I'm curious, how does that translate into something like therapy for humans?
Well, think about phobias.
Yeah.
Often they develop because of a negative association, like let's say someone gets bitten by a dog.
Yeah.
They might develop a fear of dogs because they now associate dogs with pain and danger.
Oh, yeah.
Counterconditioning, a technique based on classical conditioning, aims to break that negative link and replace it with a positive or neutral one.
Interesting. So you might pair the presence of a dog with something the person finds calming or enjoyable and gradually shift their response.
Exactly. It's like rewiring the brain's learned responses.
Right.
But here's where things get even more mind-blowing. One of your sources talks about Ader and Cohen's research in psychoneuroimmunology, where they actually conditioned rats to suppress their immune systems using a combination of essential oils and an immunosuppressant drug.
Whoa, hold on. You're saying they trained the rat's immune systems to react in a specific way, just like Pavlov trained his dog to salivate?
Yes, they paired the scent of the oils with the drug, and eventually just the smell of the oils alone was enough to trigger an immune response. Now, think about the potential implications for humans. Imagine if we could condition our bodies to fight off illness or manage autoimmune conditions using similar techniques.
That's both incredible and a little bit sci-fi. It really makes you think about the power of these basic learning principles. Speaking of learning, let's move on to the second approach you mentioned, applied behavior analysis, or operant conditioning. This is where Skinner's ideas about reinforcement and punishment come into play, right?
Exactly. Operant conditioning focuses on how the consequences of our actions shape our future behaviors. We're more likely to repeat actions that lead to rewards or help us avoid unpleasant things.
Right.
And we're less likely to do things that result in punishment or take away something we want.
It sounds like a pretty intuitive concept. Can you give us like a real-world example of how these principles work in therapy?
Absolutely. One of your sources describes a helpful tool called the ABC model: antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. So let's say a child throws a tantrum at the grocery store because they want candy. The antecedent is being in the candy aisle. The behavior is the tantrum, and the consequence is either getting the candy or being told no reward or punishment.
So by analyzing this ABC sequence, you can figure out how to change the behavior by adjusting either the antecedent or the consequence.
Exactly. In this case, you might avoid the candy aisle altogether, or you might make sure that tantrums never result in getting candy while praising and rewarding good behavior. There's also this fascinating research by Visser that explores how we can use specific questions to help people understand their own patterns of learning and growth. For example, asking someone, think of an area where you once had low ability, but now do. Okay, how did you make that happen?
That's a great question. It really prompts people to reflect on the role of effort and persistence in shaping their abilities. Okay, so we've covered classical and operant conditioning. What's the third approach?
The third one is social cognitive theory, and it highlights something we all experience: learning by watching others. Bandura's research on vicarious learning demonstrated that we could pick up new behaviors simply by observing others, even without direct instruction or feedback.
right? Like how kids learn by imitating their parents or how we might learn a dance move from a YouTube video. It seems like social media could be like a really powerful example of this too, right?
Absolutely. Social media is constantly bombarding us with examples of behavior, both positive and negative. We're learning from those models all the time, whether we realize it or not. And that brings up some important questions about how we can use this knowledge to promote positive behaviors and create healthier online environments.
That's a great point and something I'm definitely going to be thinking about more. Okay, so we've laid the groundwork for understanding the three main approaches to behavioral therapy, but I'm curious, how does this all translate into like an actual therapy session?
Great question, and that's something we'll dive into in the next part. We'll explore the role of the therapist's specific techniques and even this intriguing concept of a calm room that came up in your
A
sources.
calm room. Okay, now you've really got my attention, listeners. We'll be right back to unpack that and more, so stay tuned. All right, you left us hanging with that calm room concept. What exactly is it?
Well, it's fascinating, really, based on your research. It's a physical space that's designed to help people relax and de-escalate.
It's like a Zen den. Sign me up. But seriously, what makes a calm room different from, say, just chilling in your living room?
Yeah, well, intentionality is key.
Yeah.
It's not just about being physically comfortable. It's about incorporating sensory elements that promote a sense of calm. So think like soft lighting, calming colors, comfortable seating, maybe even things like aromatherapy or nature sounds.
So it's like creating an environment that actually cues your body and mind to relax. Are there like specific techniques you would use in a space like that?
Absolutely. The calm room could be used for practicing mindfulness or relaxation techniques like deep breathing exercises. There might be resources available like guided meditations or calming music.
I can see how this could be really helpful for folks dealing with anxiety or anger issues. It's like having a safe haven to go to when things get overwhelming.
Right. And it ties into the techniques that we discussed earlier. Imagine using a calm room for systematic desensitization. You could gradually expose someone to a feared situation within that safe space, helping them relearn their response in a controlled environment.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you've sold me on the calm room idea. I'm going to have to try and incorporate some of these elements into my own home. But before we get too carried away creating our own Zen dens, we need to talk about something really important cultural considerations.
Yes, absolutely. Behavioral therapy isn't one size fits all. One of your sources points out that it can be very effective for people who prefer a more action-oriented, goal-directed approach. They can focus on specific self-identified issues without necessarily having to delve deeply into their past or family dynamics, which can be culturally sensitive for some.
But I imagine there are also potential downsides if you're not careful, right?
Definitely, it's crucial to consider a person's cultural background beliefs and values. Things like discrimination, socioeconomic status, even just cultural norms around expressing emotions. All of these factors can play a role in someone's challenges.
So how do therapists make sure they're being culturally sensitive?
One tool that was mentioned in your research is the Cultural Formulation Interview, or CFI. It helps therapists gather information about a client's cultural background and understand how those factors might be influencing their experience.
So it's about seeing the whole person within their unique cultural context, not just focusing on the behavior in isolation.
Exactly. We can't assume that everyone experiences or expresses their emotions in the same way or that the same techniques will work for everyone.
Okay, I'm really glad we touched on that. It's a good reminder that therapy, no matter the approach, needs to be individualized and respectful of cultural differences. So where do we go from here? We've covered a lot of ground: foundations, techniques, even this amazing calm room concept.
Yeah.
What are some key takeaways you want our listener to walk away with?
I think it's important to remember that behavioral therapy is ultimately about empowering individuals to take control of their actions and work towards positive change. It's not about blaming yourself for past experiences. It's about understanding those learned patterns and finding ways to create a better future.
I love that it's a message of hope and agency, but you mentioned earlier that modern behavioral therapy also takes genetics into account. Isn't that a bit contradictory to the idea that we can unlearn behaviors?
It's a great question, and it points to the complexity of human behavior. Behavioral therapy acknowledges that our genes can influence our predispositions, but it doesn't view them as destiny. Our environment and the choices we make play a huge role as well.
So it's nature and nurture working together.
Precise. Think of it this way. Genetics might load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. We can't control our genes, but we can influence our surroundings and learn new ways of coping.
That's a powerful analogy. So how does this understanding of genetics change how behavioral therapy is practiced?
It encourages therapists to take a more holistic view, considering both the individual's learned behaviors and any potential biological factors that might be at play. This allows for a more personalized and effective approach.
It sounds like it's all about tailoring the treatment to the individual, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. What a fascinating conversation this has been. We've learned so much about how our behaviors are shaped, how they can be changed, and how important it is to consider each person's unique context.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, I think it's important to leave our listener with a final thought. Given the power of social modeling that we talked about, how might they use this knowledge to positively influence someone in their own life? It's something to ponder.
That's a great question to end on. It really highlights the ripple effects of our actions and how we can all contribute to creating positive change. Listener, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of behavioral therapy. Remember, even small changes can make a big difference.
And if you're inspired to explore this further, don't hesitate to reach out to a qualified therapist. They can help you navigate your unique journey and provide support along the way.
Until next time, keep diving deep. You know, as we've been talking about all these different techniques, I keep thinking about how behavioral therapy is often seen as very practical and action-oriented, but there's also this element of self-awareness that seems so crucial.
Yeah, you're right. Self-awareness is absolutely fundamental to behavioral therapy. It's about understanding the patterns of your own behavior, recognizing what triggers certain reactions, and then developing strategies to change those patterns.
It's like becoming a detective of your own mind, right? Looking for clues and figuring out the why behind your actions.
Exactly. And once you understand the why, you can start to change that's where those practical techniques we discussed earlier come in, whether it's systematic desensitization shaping or using reinforcement strategies. It's all about applying those tools to create the changes you want to see.
But it sounds like self-awareness isn't just about understanding the problem, it's also about recognizing your own strengths and resources, right?
Absolutely. Behavioral therapy isn't just about fixing what's wrong. It's also about building on what's right. What are your strengths? What are you already good at? How can you leverage those strengths to support your growth and create positive change?
That's a really empowering way to think about it. It's not just about overcoming challenges, it's about tapping into your own inner resilience
Yeah.
and using that to create a more fulfilling life.
Exactly. And remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, and there will be ups and downs along the way. But by developing that self-awareness, you'll be better equipped to navigate those challenges and stay committed to your goals.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful journey into the world of behavioral therapy. We've covered so much from the foundational theories of Pavlov, Skinner, and Bandura to the practical applications in therapy and even the potential role of genetics. We've explored techniques like counterconditioning reinforcement, systematic desensitization, and even peeked into a calm room.
It's been a fascinating exploration, and I hope our listener has gained a new appreciation for the power and versatility of behavioral therapy. It's an approach that offers practical tools for creating real and lasting change.
And it's a reminder that we all have the capacity to learn, grow, and shape our own behavior. So, listener, as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to take what you've learned and apply it to your own life. Think about one small behavior you'd like to change and start exploring the techniques we've discussed.
Remember, even small steps can lead to big transformations. And if you find yourself needing support along the way, don't hesitate to reach out to a qualified therapist.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into behavioral therapy. We hope you found it informative and empowering. Until next time, keep exploring and keep diving deep.